Courtside of the Virtual Hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, episode number 432. I'm your host, Andrew NLSC on Twitter. My co-host is Derek, DV384 on Twitter. Derek, good to be talking to you again.
I'm happy to be here. I actually have a question for you to start off this show. What player from the NBA's past would you want to bring into the NBA today just to see how they would perform, how successful they would be, as accolade-wise, how they, what numbers they would put up, just how they would perform in today's NBA?
Well, my obvious answer is Michael Jordan, naturally. I'd love to see him perform in an era where there's certainly less physicality, where there is that freedom of movement and whatnot, where there is that the spacing that they really encourage these days, or so they say. I'd love to see MJ just tear up the modern league, obviously. But that's an easy answer. That's an obvious answer, being an MJ fan. So I'm going to go you one better with a different bull, and I'll say Ben Gordon, because I'd love to see what he can do with the green light to just fire away. Because, he could really knock it down from downtown, Ben Gordon. 9 for 9 in one game, 40% for his career from downtown. I'd love to see Gordon, like players who really could let it fly back in the day with even more freedom to do so now. As much as I have my issues with the three-point shootouts of the modern game at times, just to see someone like a Ben Gordon really, if he could dominate with that freedom. But how about you?
You can tell Andrew is a huge Bulls fan, because
Yes.
I asked him to pick anybody in NBA history to see how they would do today. And he picked two Bulls, one of the Bulls being Ben Gordon. You could have chosen anybody. You could have chosen Dr. J, Julius Erving. You could have chosen Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell. But you chose Ben Gordon, and you were definitely a loyal Bulls fan. But it's true when you talk about, the freedom to fire away. Etuan Moore mentioned in a recent article that when he first came into the league, it was discouraged to take contested shots. Like if you took a contested shot, you would be frowned upon by your coach and whatnot, and the coaching staff, and they might get on you about it, maybe take you out of the game, etc. And then a few years later, when the NBA started changing course and direction, and it became encouraged to take those contested and semi-contested outside shots. It was no longer considered a bad shot. So imagine Ben Gordon with the freedom that they have today to just chuck, because he was a damn good scorer, and he was really good at creating his shot, like creating his own shot and whatnot. I think he would be even better today. You asked me. I think Larry Bird, I'd love to see him in today's NBA, because I'm seeing so many people on Twitter, NBA Twitter, which is just a nightmare right now for a basketball discussion. It's so toxic. A lot of people comparing Larry Bird to like Joe Ingles and saying, well, Larry Bird would just be Joe Ingles today, etc. I just saw 2 posts about that, actually. And I would love for him to play today and just rip the league up. The knock on Larry is that, he doesn't look very athletic, right? And, 2 of the best players in the NBA right now who are dominating the league are Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic.
I was going to say, they're not, yeah.
Those are the furthest thing from super athletes. And Larry was 6'9", so he had the size. Hell, they're putting 6'8", 6'9" guys at center now in today's NBA. But Larry was, 6'9", and he had the high release and get his shot off, whenever he wanted and from wherever he wanted. He could, roast people from the outside. He could roast people back to the basket. He was an amazing rebounder, amazing passer. One of the better team defenders, actually, during his playing days. So would love to be able to shut these kids up today, and the talking heads who, diminish what Larry Bird did, and just see him dominate even more in the NBA today. Another guy that I'd love to see in the NBA today is Wilt Chamberlain. And I know that's a common choice, but there's a lot of people who try to, down his stats and accomplishments by saying, oh, well, there are less teams when he played, which, by the way, less teams often means more competition.
Because I was going to say, because people say MJ had the benefit of more teams and an expansion era, but then they go the other way. So it's both weaker with less teams and weaker with more teams. It's weaker. Right. It's whatever they want it to be.
Just to put some context around this so people understand what I'm talking about. Wilt Chamberlain had to face Bill Russell 143 times.
Exactly.
In the 10 seasons that they played against each other, 3.5 of which they weren't in the same division. So 10 seasons, 143 times. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson only played each other 37 times their whole careers. And Dirk Nowitzki and Tim Duncan faced off 90 times, playing 18 seasons against each other, and all in the same conference. So that's some context. So Wilt Chamberlain was playing against very good competition for his time, and it was, often battles night in and night out. And, the other reason why I'd want to see him in today's NBA and see what numbers he would put up and how he would dominate. See, people talk about how, players weren't as athletic and everything. Well, Wilt Chamberlain was a track star. Like, he was an Olympic level athlete at his size. And you listen to past players talk about Wilt Chamberlain and people who played it with him in charity events and other events in the 80s and whatnot. And they talk about him being the strongest player they've ever played against. Like just a amazingly strong, athletic, big guy. And in my opinion, he'd be the best athlete in the NBA today for his size. And the strongest. So I would love to be able to also shut those people up and be like, hey, Wilt Chamberlain in today's NBA, now look at the numbers he's putting up, look at his accolades, look at the accomplishments he's putting up. Are you still going to, crap on, what was going on in the 60s and whatnot? So Wilt Chamberlain's another one, but there's so many different players, and I know that you have other ones too, that you would love to see in the NBA today, in this freedom of movement era, where they took a lot of physicality out of the game, where there's two rules that are keeping, players out of the paint. You got the defensive 3-second rule and the restricted area, etc. I'd love to see a guy like Tom Chambers from the 80s in today's NBA, Larry Nance from the 80s and the early 90s. Would love to see Dr. J now and everything. But I think Larry Bird and Wilt Chamberlain are definitely up there for two guys I'd love to see play now.
Well, you talk about a Wilt Chamberlain, and a lot of players back in the day were multi, as you say, they were track stars or multi-sport stars, or they played a lot of sports growing up, so they excelled at several. So they were very well-rounded athletes, certainly not the plumbers and dentists. And people say, oh, well, it was just the stars. It was everybody else. No. Athletes have existed since ancient times.
Right,
so,
right. The stars, the whole thing, that whole thing. Well, it was the stars, or there was only a few of those guys in the league at the time. Yeah, because only those guys had those natural gifts, and only those guys knew how to work out and eat right. We're not going to be naturally gifted. We're not going to know how to work out. We're not going to know how to eat right. Only you guys. Only you top players. See, it just logically, it doesn't make sense. So I think Wilt Chamberlain, like I said, today would be the best big man athlete, as he was back then, with no differences in the way he treated his body or anything like that. I think he'd be the best athlete in the NBA today.
People forget because they don't know the other players. The players that weren't stars do fade into history, and the same thing will happen to the current generation. I've said this before on various podcasts and when we were doing Holding Court as well, that the players who aren't big names then and now, there's a lot of talent there and athleticism, but they just get forgotten because the people don't tell stories about them. Absolutely. I'm intrigued also by the idea of those dominant centers being in the modern game, because people say, oh, they wouldn't be able to survive because they don't have the three-point shot or whatever. But you bring in somebody who's a dominant post force, and the game is going to change. They're going to have to figure that out. So the game would evolve, rather than evolving from that to three-point shooting. If you brought that into the modern game, you would have to go the other way. But someone like a David Robinson, Hakeem Olajuwon obviously would be fantastic. Shaq, who's stopping Shaq these days?
Moses Malone.
Sure.
The boards. What are you doing with Moses Malone in the paint? The other thing, too, is there was, I forget which former player it was, but they played for the Rockets. It might have been Vernon Maxwell. I'm not sure. I'd have to look. Or Mario Elie. I think it was Mario Elie. Said that Hakeem Olajuwon would smoke threes in practice. Like he would just be out there effortlessly shooting threes. What people don't understand is a lot of these big guys, the David Robinsons, the Hakeem Olajuwons and everything, they had range and they were consistently hitting 18 to 20-foot jumpers, right? Back then. And that's why they had to be covered so high in the high post. So if you think that a guy like Brook Lopez, who didn't shoot threes earlier in his career, and was able to adapt. We talk about Splash Mountain on the last podcast. He's able to start stepping out and hitting threes all of a sudden. If you don't think guys that were hitting those deep mid-range shots, the Olajuwons, the David Robinsons, etc., the Alonzo Mournings, if you don't think that they'd be able to adjust and start taking threes if coaching staffs asked them for them and be effective doing it, you're crazy. Like they definitely could. Jack Sikma is an example of a guy who earlier in his career, and you can look that up on Basketball Reference, earlier in his career, he wasn't asked to shoot threes. They wanted him more around the basket. They wanted him in the mid-range. They wanted him to be able to hit those offensive boards. Later in his career, he was asked to shoot some threes, and he shot them at a higher percentage. So basically, these players can adapt. And the ones that were shooting those deep mid-rangers and had those nice shooting forms and everything, the big guys from back then who didn't shoot them, can guarantee that they'd be able to step a couple feet back and hit threes today if they were asked.
No doubt. And one more point about Ben Gordon. He was a pretty muscular player. He was pretty built for a 6'3" combo guard. And I think if you open up the lane as well, he got in there. I talked in a previous podcast about how he got up for a big dunk, occasionally back in the day, and how that would really catch me off guard and really entertain me when I saw that. And they stick in my mind because he was mostly a shooter, but he could go to the rim. So again, you open up the lane, and a lot of those guys that could drive but didn't do it as much because they were shorter. You did have the big men patrolling the paint, shutting that down, taking that away. They're going to get to the rim as well. Yes, they can shoot, but if you take away that shot, they're going to beat you off the dribble. So there's a lot of players back then. A Chuck Person, a Dale Ellis, those gunners from back in the day as well. Muhammad Abdul-Rauf, of course, that Phil Jackson compared stylistically to Steph Curry, and of course he copped a lot of heat for that. But people are saying, no, he's not necessarily on the level of Steph Curry. Who knows what he'd be today, of course. But Phil Jackson simply made a style comparison, a comparison to the style of play. And
he got eaten up for that too. Yeah, he got criticized.
People focused on that first bit. And said, they focused on the direct comparison of statistics and accomplishments as opposed to play style, and saying that back then that's kind of what that kind of play style was relegated to, not necessarily your star, because it wasn't necessarily...
Right, exactly. If Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, with that style and his consistency and the way he was able to create his shot in a league that was inside out and not outside in, like it is today, if he was averaging like 19 points per game back then, how effective and how much better do you think he would be today, utilized more, handling the ball more, being looked for more, and with that license to shoot as much as the players do today? And yeah, totally agree. And I agree about Ben Gordon. He was absolutely built. And even back, when they were allowed to play more physical defense, he was slicing and dicing through the lane. And, he was very good at, finishing and ones and whatnot because he was a strong player. So, with the emphasis of freedom of movement, as Adam Silver called it, I definitely think that Ben Gordon would be even more effective, not even as just a shooter, like an outside shooter, but somebody who gets to the rim.
I mean, absolutely. But you got to remember, Derek, when you look at NBA Twitter and you see people making comparisons between players and analyzing players, and they're talking about overalls in 2K, or they're referring to my player builds as the way of analyzing players, we're not talking about people who really know the game.
No, I want to 100% agree. And also, the talking heads in the media and the high follower accounts on Twitter, they don't help. If anything, they just make it worse.
But speaking of those what ifs and how players would fare in the NBA today, how do you think Bowser would fare in the NBA today?
Bowser from Mario. Well, his listed height is actually over 10 feet tall. So my guess is that Bowser, a.k.a. King Koopa, would probably completely dominate the NBA today. I uploaded a video to the NLSC YouTube that had mods in it by modder JMO. He created a whole bunch of cartoon and anime mods. And he made basically all the Super Smash Brothers. Like he made Mario and Luigi and Star Fox and all these guys, Bowser and etc. And he made other Mario characters as well, Yoshi and everything. And then he also made some other video game characters, video game legends you could call them, Sonic the Hedgehog and whatnot. And we were intrigued by this because, you and I, we grew up playing games like Looney Tunes basketball. I spent a lot of times on Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars, and it was always fun to play those games, favorite cartoons growing up, our favorite characters from favorite cartoons that we watched growing up playing a game that we love. Basketball and whatnot. And it was really intriguing to download these mods, which were done so well by JMO, and the mods were free, which is always nice. And, put those guys all on the same team and play against the computer. So my oldest brother, Mark, came over, and it was me, Nick, and Mark. We all played on the same team. I locked on Sonic the Hedgehog, and I played point guard. Nick locked on Bowser, who we have listed at 8'5" in the game, so his mechanics work right and whatnot. And my brother Mark used the rest of the characters, and we had an absolute blast, just like we used to when we played Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars, and like you did when you played Looney Tunes B-Ball and whatnot. And I think that there's still a place in the basketball gaming space for games like this, for cartoon basketball, and I think that it's an opportunity that's been missed because they haven't been making games like that. When's the last time a game was made like that? Probably Dunk Lords, but those were that wasn't based on a cartoon. So when was the last time there was a game made from a favorite cartoon show and them playing hoop?
I mean, I'd have to say Nicktoons Basketball, which is circa 2004, I believe that came out, with Nickelodeon characters. Not all of the Nickelodeon characters that we grew up with, some of the newer ones that were after our time. But that's probably the last one that was licensed like that. I suppose you do have Sonic in the that Olympic Tokyo Olympics game, the basketball segment of that. I believe Sonic can play in that part of it. But apart from that, it really does come down to mods. And I know it's not for everyone. I know people kind of look at that and think, oh, it's a bit too silly. And hey, play basketball games the way you want. But I've always enjoyed having that silliness there as an option. Back in the day, we had Lutz's silly rosters he distributed with his NBA Live 95 roster updates. They'd have all the serious rosters, the current rosters, and the retro rosters in the pack. And they would also have the silly rosters that I know on Chicago you replace players with characters from Married with Children, for example, things like that. Beavis and Butthead were in the game, so that I'll have to share that with you at some point as well. And of course, there were people making wrestler mods back in the day as well. I forget who made it, but somebody made a really good Undertaker mod for NBA Live 08. So these mods have always been around, and as you said, it's great when they're made available free of charge, which is how modding should be. And yeah, it just changed up the game. It's just something fun to do. But beyond modding, to actually make a separate game that does have those either licensed characters or something crazy like that, even the hidden characters in NBA Jam, they were a lot of fun.
No, 100%. It's loose, clean fun. Like we really enjoyed it. And, Sonic with the rebound, Bowser with the rebound, outlets to Sonic, finds Mario on the break and he throws it down. I mean, that's just like, fantasy fun. And I think that JMO releasing all of those mods for free, and they're so well done. You saw the video. I mean, it looks exactly like Mario out there, Luigi. Bowser even has his shell. And, Sonic looks exactly like Sonic out there. The fact that he released those for free for the community to enjoy, and he doesn't believe in charging for mods and all of that stuff, good for him. But yeah, like you said, if it's not for you, it's not for you. We totally get that. That's not for everybody. But at the same time, you know what? There is a place for that. And we got some comments on that YouTube video of people being like, well, Bowser's a literal paint beast. And, I think JMO himself was like, oh my God, Bowser had 27 blocks. We had another positive comment on there. So people definitely dig the footage and the idea. I know that it's not for everybody.
Well, is any mod for everyone? No. I mean, there are some people that have no interest in retro rosters or current rosters or or college rosters or fever rosters or whatever, and yet there are many others who would love those mods and really enjoy those mods when they're made. So I understand the objection. I don't think it will encourage 2K to do anything untoward, at least nothing more than they're doing already with Crocs and jetpacks in the city and the neighborhood. But I understand the objections, but yeah, that stuff is fun.
No, 100%. I mean, we're going to continue playing those, using those mods for fun at times, when me and my two brothers get together, because it brings back another portion of our childhood that we enjoyed, that like there's nostalgia behind it. We used to play Tiny Toons Acme All-Stars, the basketball portion of the game, all the time when we were younger, and we used to face off, and I always used to get, Montana Max on my team, and he was a legend in the area. It was called Downtown in the video game. It was one of the venues that you could play at, and I think I scored like 100 points with him one game, so he's like a video game legend now, even though it's Montana Max.
Are you saying that Montana Max is money?
Yeah. Yes.
I went there.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, you went there. Yep. No, that works. Yeah. He's money. And, it was just something that we have nostalgia for, and we really enjoyed doing when we were younger. So now we can bring that into the newer basketball games with even better graphics, and 3D versions of these players, and it'd be awesome. So good stuff. And thank you to JMO for releasing all of those mods for free.
No, that is something that I really do appreciate. That is a contentious issue in the modding community in recent years and whatnot, but I really do appreciate when people release their work free of charge. I mean, the tools are there for free. There's so many hosting options that are there for free, and the knowledge that you get from other people is often so often freely given. We really do stand on the shoulders of giants, of the modders that came before us and paved the way and made the tools and made them freely available and made that knowledge freely available. So I always believe that it's important to pay it forward and give back to the modding community when it's giving you that knowledge and giving you those tools to make those great mods. And again, this is people's personal choice as to how they handle it, but I think that's the right way.
I want to bring something up too. The same people that might crap on the use of like Mario and Luigi and Yoshi or Bowser or whatnot in video games and be like, well, that's childish. Those are the same people that would tune into Space Jam, the movie, and just love it, right? Like they would jump into Space Jam, the movie, either it's the new one with LeBron, which I try to pretend doesn't exist, or the one with MJ from the 90s, and they'll be like, oh my God, that's a great movie. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Well, what is that? That's cartoon characters playing basketball with Michael Jordan. So you got to think, if you enjoy the Space Jam movie, and cartoons playing basketball there, then shouldn't be really that big of a problem if, we enjoy them on the virtual hardwood.
I remember also back in the day, somebody made remember that movie Like Mike? Didn't do very well, I understand. But
yeah, I definitely remember that movie. Yeah.
But someone added Lil Bow Wow, a mod for 2004, I think, around about the time that movie came out. So this has always been a thing. Adding something out of the box to the game has always been a part of modding.
I mean, hell, I made the mask. The cyberface of the mask and Hellboy.
Yeah.
I made Sylvester Stallone, Rocky, and I made Apollo Creed and whatnot. So there's thousands of people that download those mods, right? Like there's a lot of people that use them, and there's some big YouTubers like Dom2K and Dominus who have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and a large portion of the people that subscribe to those two channels is for video, gameplay and commentary using mods like that, using, character mods and fantasy scenarios and all of that stuff. So, you can crap on that all you want, but there is actually a demand for that. And even if people don't use those mods, they love watching the videos of those characters playing on screen.
I mean, even something like your Ultimate Classic Teams roster, which is a more realistic take on a fantasy scenario, but you're taking players from different eras and being able to pit them together, which is a very fun idea, and it's why you do it. But again, that is not realistic in the sense of being a complete retro roster or a complete current roster. You're mixing and matching eras there, which is the great thing about it. But again, that is complete fantasy. Just a fantasy that's based in, I guess, the real NBA rather than fictional characters.
Right, exactly. So like Wilt Chamberlain never played against Dwight Howard, but in my roster, you can do that.
Right.
Like you could use, the Wilt Chamberlain in 66, 67 and face him off with the 08, 09 Dwight Howard. And that's a possibility. Right. So to think about it that way. Right. Exactly. So there's all these different scenarios that have not happened in real life or could not happen in real life, or just completely fantasy based. And all of those scenarios really have an audience if you really think about it. And there's no further proof, like I said, than YouTube accounts like Dominus and Dom2K.
No, absolutely. There's just so many things we can do with modding, and that's been the great thing about our modding community throughout the years. Before we go on to our main discussion topic this week, just want to remind everyone to connect with the NLSC on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC Basketball on Instagram, and our YouTube channel, of course, is youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. The NLSC itself is nba-live.com, and the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, as well as podcatching apps everywhere. So, Derek, you threw out the mailbag question this week, but we got so many great responses that we thought, you know what, we're going to turn this into a full discussion topic.
No, absolutely. I reached out to you immediately after I posted the question on Twitter because we got a bunch of responses right away and a lot of great ideas that we could talk about. So here's the question that I actually posed to the basketball gaming community. You are tasked with creating a mode similar to the Jordan Challenge that was in 2K11, but for NBA 2K23. Which player or team would you create the mode for, and how would the mode be structured? And you know what's great is what would be the obvious answer for an idea? Like, it would be Kobe. It was a really big mistake and a missed opportunity when NBA 2K21 was in development for them not to put a mode around Kobe to celebrate Kobe's career. They had NBA 2K14 Path to Greatness for LeBron, the 2K11 Jordan Challenge for Michael Jordan. Why not celebrate Kobe's greatest moments of his career with a mode centered around him? The amnesty that game, dropping 62 points on the Mavericks in 3 quarters, his 81-point game, big games in the playoffs, etc., his championship runs, all of that stuff. There was so much content they could have done. There's so many things they could have done with that. But, we didn't get people giving that obvious answer or that obvious idea of, hey, Kobe. We had a bunch of different ideas ranging from players to teams to what ifs, all of that stuff. So I'm excited to actually get into this when you start reading their responses, because I think that the community is incredibly creative, and they did a great job here.
It's a mode that definitely, that kind of mode, that concept really does invite creativity. I mean, LeBron Path to Greatness, when we first heard about that, it sounded like, we're just going to do the Jordan Challenge. But no, it was a fantasy mode that went into the speculative future, either staying in Miami, which, funnily enough, he didn't, or leaving, which he did. So they kind of predicted that. With Kobe Bryant and NBA 2K21, I imagine they were too far into pre-production to really do anything with that. But at the same time, there's not that focus on offline modes or solo player modes these days. We don't see that celebration of the history outside of my team where they can make money off it. And that's unfortunately, as cynical as it sounds, that is the problem with a mode like this, that it does take time and effort to create, and it's not a priority. But I'd love to see them make it one, because those modes were so much fun. You could integrate that with my team and my career, find a way for it to earn extra VC or unlock rewards in other modes. You could definitely be creative with that. Again, these modes invite creativity. You look at what the WWE 2K series has done with 2K Showcase, where they've been able to relive the Attitude Era, or the history of WrestleMania, the Women's Revolution in WWE. So these ideas are definitely possible, and you've got 75 years of NBA history to draw upon. So, yeah, there's endless ideas that you can go with.
100%. I know you mentioned that maybe it was a time thing with NBA 2K21, but just let's keep in mind that they also didn't do it in 2K22 for Kobe.
That's true.
So I just want to throw that out there, because they had, another year of development there where they could have done that for 2K22, and they did not. But I think a lot of this stuff is tied behind my team, right? And my team is a huge money-making mode for them, maybe the biggest money-making mode for NBA 2K, just like Ultimate Team is for Madden. and whatnot. So having those, like similar challenges, or, the different challenges and ideas, and throwing them into my team is just a way for, 2K to just make a lot of money. I'm sure that's why we haven't had a mode like that for some time.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, I mentioned this on Twitter, but Jeremy Lin is still in 2K22 as a collectible player in my team. However, he's not in the default rosters. He's not on the 2012 Knicks, which is the whole reason to include the 2012 Knicks, Linsanity, right? And this would also, of course, be a great moment in NBA history. The Linsanity run, or the that game against Kobe, for example, that was a real breakout game where he outscored Kobe. That would be an opportunity to include a game like that and have you replay it, and of course include him on the 2012 Knicks by default, and actually have a reason to include him in the game. But yeah, he's my team exclusive now. But of course, so if you want to play with Jeremy Lin, you got to pull him in a pack, or maybe get him in the auction house, because it is an auctionable card, I checked. But either get it in the auction house for those ridiculous MT prices, or spend money on packs and hope that you get him.
Well, like I said to you off air, I think that Jeremy Lin also had a fallout with the NBA, and possibly that could be the reason why he's not on the 2012 Knicks in the default roster, because he was one of the best players in the G League. Actually, he made the G League All-Star game. I can't remember if it was last season or the season before. I want to say it was last season. And he didn't get one call, I guess, per him, from an NBA team, and nobody gave him a shot, even though he was one of the best players in the G League. And I think that rubbed him the wrong way. So I wouldn't be surprised if he, had a little bit of a fallout with the NBA, and maybe that's the reason why they're not including him in the main roster. Maybe he didn't want to be. So I'm not sure. But that is very interesting. They're also in the NBA now, they're kind of pushing veterans out, and even if they are better than players on current rosters and whatnot, because they're trying to make the league as young as possible, and get those young players in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if the reason why he didn't get a call also is because veterans aren't getting calls.
I mean, that's true as well, and that's very unfortunate about the real NBA. We've spoken about that before, and totally agree. But when you look at the My Team situation, there's a lot of players that are exclusive to My Team. Cedric Ceballos, he's not in any of the all-time teams, or not. There's no historical team with Cedric Ceballos. He's not on any of the all-time teams. Dino Raja's another one. And look, it may be hard to get them in there because there are other, especially Raja and the Celtics, right? I mean, there's more than 15 players that you would include ahead of Dino Raja on the all-time Celtics. And while I'd love to see a 95 Celtics team in the game, as I'm sure you would as well, that may be a lower priority. But there's got to be a way to get those players playable outside of My Team. Or there's definitely ways of doing it. You could have Legends pools. You could have extra slots on the all-time teams. You could have some of the you could have extra teams that you could find a way to play with them outside of My Team, basically. But then you lose that ability to have them as a hook, as a My Team exclusive, to charge for them, essentially.
Right, 100%. I think that it's tough because there's so many different players that they have now in My Team. There's just it's so tough to get teams representing them in the video game, right? Like, you have Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson in My Team, but there's no Nets team with them on it, like the 91-92 Nets or whatnot. I think that it would just be really hard for them to have an actual a classic team representing all of those players, because they already have so many classic teams as it is in the game. And I think at times we're spoiled with the amount of content that we get, because you and I know, when we were coming up, it was a lot of times you were only using just the default NBA teams,
of course,
and whatnot. Now, is that content rushed, and a lot of times spreadsheet copy and paste, and is that really bothersome and disrespectful a lot of times? Absolutely. It's ridiculous. But we do have a lot of a base to work with as far as like editing and having those art assets in the game and whatnot. So that is nice about having all of those classic teams in the default roster. But yeah, it would be basically impossible for them to have a classic team representing all of those players they have in My Team.
I think maybe you could add some kind of decade underdogs, or you could have some kind of team where they were playable and then you could move them into the default roster. But again, then you can't charge for them. I think Coleman and Anderson are on the all-time Nets. because you've got to.
That's a good point too, right? That's a good point too. The all-time teams. When I mentioned Coleman and Anderson, I should have thought about that, but they don't have a classic team representing them. But it is good that you can use them in offline, right? Exactly.
But then again, as I said, a team like the Celtics or the Lakers that have had all these legendary players throughout their long history, you can't fit some of those extra players like Adino Raja is not going to be ahead of the 15 players they have there already.
Right, exactly. No, 100%.
But if you do have a challenge mode, I think it does give incentive to really pay attention to those classic teams. We talked in a previous show about the Jordan Challenge and how they really went all out on the presentation and making sure that MJ looked right. And even in NBA's Greatest, of course, they had all the era-specific presentation and things like that. So those are the kind of touches that would be great to bring back for a retro challenge mode. It gives you an incentive to play with those retro teams. You could add some more retro teams to really celebrate a player's career. But with that in mind, before we get to the answers from our listeners, would you prefer a mode that focuses on the NBA as a whole and the great teams, or on a specific player?
That's tough. I think that I could enjoy both. To be honest with you, it'd be cool to have a whole ABA mode, wouldn't it?
Oh, sure.
Like for a league, so not even just a team or a player, a whole league. Play through the years of the ABA and whatnot. That would be a nightmare to try to get all those licenses, right, and all those permissions in order to allow that. But it is tough. One person, not to spoil the mailbag, mentioned the Golden State Warriors and their run with Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. So we're not focused on a specific player. We're focused on a specific team and a certain run. So, like a mode built around the Shaq Kobe Lakers, that would be a mode I would play. That would be really fun, right? A mode built around the Big Three Celtics, when after they acquired Robert Parrish and, drafted Kevin McHale and whatnot, and it's that Big Three with Larry Bird and whatnot, I would play that mode, a challenge mode based on that specific team. I would do it for Russell's championships, etc. So it's interesting because I could go either way, teams or players.
I'm the same, but I think at this point, and especially having seen what they did with the 2K showcase in the WWE 2K games, and this is a missed opportunity with the league's 75th anniversary that 2K did, and I thought maybe they might do that when they were hinting at the 75th anniversary edition, whatnot, is to have that showcase mode where you play significant games in NBA history, starting with the 60s, going through 70s, 80s, 90s, up to today, and making use of those classic teams, maybe adding some more as necessary, celebrating the history of the league, and maybe challenging you to replicate feats, kind of that mix of the Jordan Challenge and NBA's Greatest, and also celebrating the complete history, not just the past as it was then, but also right up to today, and some more recent history as well. So that was a missed opportunity. Again, it comes down to time and effort and what will make the money. But I'd like a mode like that really celebrates the entire history of the league and specific games, not just championship games, maybe throw in an All-Star game, a memorable All-Star game like the 1988 All-Star game in Chicago. That duel between, I said a duel between Dominic Wilkins and Michael Jordan. Of course, that was the dunk contest, but even in the All-Star game itself, they were kind of having a scoring battle between themselves on the on the same team. But there's a lot of stuff they could do in that regard. So if I had to pick one, because I could go either way as well, but if I had to pick one, I think I would go with teams and moments in NBA history.
No, that would be amazing. And that way you can touch on all eras and, educate some of our youth maybe on some of the greatest moments in basketball history as well. And you can utilize things like we had in 2K12, like the black and white filter. Like they had for the NBA's Greatest mode. I have a highlight actually that I've been wanting to put into the top 10 plays of the week. And it's actually me throwing an up fake with Bill Russell from the mid range, driving it in and throwing it down in traffic. And it's, I'm playing the NBA's Greatest mode and it's in black and white because they had that black and white filter on there. Just looks really, really cool. So you could have, your black and white filter for when you're doing 50s and 60s. You can have, a filter that looks more like the way it was pictured in the 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. And you could have the rules reflect what they were at the time, which would be really cool. We've talked about era-specific rules for a while now. Is that'd be a really cool option for them to include by default anyway. And yeah, I think that would be a mode that I would definitely play, and I'd love to showcase.
No, I'm completely with you on that one, and I think a lot of our listeners are as well. And with that being said, let's tip things off with King J Mace. Quite simply says Mamba mode, Kobe Bryant celebration, which, as we said, was a missed opportunity these last couple of years. It's a Kobe challenge, rookie year all the way up to his last game with 60, 24 challenges, and an alternate path if the Cavs would have traded LeBron for Kobe. So a what-if scenario. Interesting. The amnesty that game versus the Mavs, 62 in 3/4, the Rucker Park game, matching up versus MJ. Yeah, I mean, what an awesome idea, and it would have been great to celebrate the late Kobe Bryant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with his ideas. I love the alternate path idea, adding spice to the mode, adding kind of a what-if scenario to the mode, and being able to continue on that path and see how that would have worked out. If he had, teamed up with LeBron or gone somewhere else, etc. But Kobe had so many moments, and he brought up a couple of them in his career. How about playing either the whole 7-game series or just Game 7 versus the, Portland Trailblazers in the year 2000, where Kobe does that crossover and then he throws the alley-oop to Shaq and Shaq points, right? Like that's another moment that could be playable within the Mamba mode and whatnot. Obviously his 81-point game, all of that stuff. So I love those ideas from him, and obviously a Kobe mode would be a huge hit. Can you imagine how many people on YouTube would be showcasing that mode, making videos on that mode? You'd have, the Dom 2Ks and the Dominus, the people with the, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 or more subscribers, just showcasing that mode. And it would be amazing for 2K for promotion. Like I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be a good idea to put a Kobe Bryant mode in the game.
And if you add some scoreboards, online leaderboards to that mode as well, who can, especially if the mode challenges you to replicate those feats, who can get it the most accurate? For example, if you have the 62 points in 3/4 of the 81-point game, can you do it on the same amount of field goal attempts or less? Or do you end up taking 100 shots to score 81 points? Things like that, and you get the better score, and you rank higher on the leaderboard for that accuracy in replicating the score. And so there would be videos not only showcasing those great performances on the sticks and being able to replicate it with so much accuracy and with such a great score, but also some strategy videos, how to beat this tough challenge. Because if you try and replicate some of the feats that NBA players have made over the years, we talk about, that was a video game performance. But sometimes you try to replicate that on the virtual hardwood, and it makes you appreciate how special it was, because even with the advantages of video games, some of those games are not easy to replicate.
Right, and how cool would it be if you could upload highlights that you had from your experience with that challenge in, let's say, the Mamba mode and whatnot, and people could view your highlights? How cool would that, like, in the game? Like, you go and enter the mode and be like, check out what D for Free did with Kobe in this game. And it's something that they can click on and they can watch some of your best moments, or a highlight that you saved and shared from that challenge that you completed. I would do that. I would go in there and I would watch what other people were able to do and watch their highlights, because I think that would be really, really neat.
Oh, absolutely. And I think you need that now. You need to have that connected experience in some way, that community aspect of a mode like this. I mean, even if it's ultimately single player, having that connection to the wider community, possibly even making some multiplayer challenges.
Oh, 100%. Being able to either have somebody join in locally or somebody be able to connect with you online in order to help you with those challenges and make that a shared experience. All the tech is there. All the technology is there. You can do stuff like that. I definitely think that would be a missed opportunity if they did create a mode like that, but didn't allow, you to share it with other people.
Next up, we have Rel House. Said the Legend mode was fire. Threw out a couple of suggestions here. For an historical approach, 76ers and Allen Iverson, which I think would be great to celebrate. If we're going through year by year and maybe celebrating a different legend each year, a la the Jordan Challenge, I think Iverson is definitely a candidate for that. But also another idea, taking a modern player like Darius Garland of the Cavs and building a mode around them, kind of making them into a star, not so much celebrating their past, although you could certainly celebrate their path to the NBA as part of it, but then once you're in the NBA, turning them into a star and a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, the Darius Garland thing is interesting because I look at that more as a mode that could be centered around the player's come up. A lot of these players who are now in the NBA, these young players who are getting a lot of coverage and, putting up numbers and whatnot, we've been following them since they were in like AAU, right? Like young kids in AAU, people were watching their highlights. I'm going to use a guy. There's no mode going to be around Thon Maker, trust me. But I'm going to use a guy like Thon Maker where everybody was seeing his AAU tapes or his high school highlights and whatnot. And they obviously thought he was going to be much better than he ended up being in the NBA. But that's just an example of a player that we followed for years before he ended up hitting the NBA. So a mode around a guy like Darius Garland, maybe you can play some of his AAU games with his real AAU team that he was playing with. Maybe you play some of his high school games or his big high school games if he had them. If he, the same, like if in college, if you could maybe do some of like a college challenge related to him, but you could do come-ups of the young current players that are in the game. And I think that a mode around that would be excellent. As far as Iverson goes, I think it's a little bit tougher to create a mode around AI. He's had so many good games, obviously stepping over Tyronn Lue and in the NBA Finals versus the Lakers, just even taking that Sixers team to the NBA Finals, a very underwhelming 76ers team. And that's just a feat in itself. But I think it would be tough to find enough moments in Allen Iverson's career, specifically to create an entire mode around him. And I'd like to get your thoughts on that. He'd had years with Melo and Kenyon Martin and Marcus Camby and whatnot in Denver. They were not successful. They never got past the first round. And then outside of making the finals that one year, he never really advanced far in the playoffs. So, what are your thoughts on, is there enough content for Allen Iverson to do a Jordan Challenge type mode around him? And if you did, would you have to include, obviously, like his Georgetown days and maybe also do a come up with him?
I mean, possibly. I think you'd probably start off with the breakout game in his rookie year against MJ, where he had the crossover on his ANS. That's sort of the arrival of the answer kind of thing. Then you might do some of those early playoff appearances where he's taken the 76ers back to the playoffs for the first time in several years and breaks that drought. Then you might do the 2001 All-Star Game. And that's an interesting one because you could probably actually license everyone in that All-Star Game. I'd say I'd have to look, but I think maybe everyone in that 2001 All-Star Game is actually in the game already. And certainly a majority of them, compared to getting the full benches, for example. Actually, Rasheed Wallace, I think, is in that game, and he's out. But you've got a pretty close to complete 2001 All-Star rosters in the game, I believe, already. And then the finals, he had that 60-point game a couple of years later. So I think you could probably find standout games where he scored 50 or 60, plus some that have got that significance of being in the playoffs. But it's definitely going to be a scoring challenge, for the most part, with Allen Iverson.
Oh, no, 100%. Another series that they could highlight is the one versus the Bucks that ended up getting them to the NBA Finals in 2001. An unbelievable series against Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson and whatnot in that team. He might have enough moments in his career. Not a lot that kids today would know about, though, right? So, that would be all mostly new material for our youth today. It would be a learning experience, I think, for them for the most part. But I think that, you could also treat it as, use some of his come up, maybe you have a college game or two with him with the Hoyas. Because I watched a lot of him in college, actually, when I could. And he was an excellent college player. And then maybe you go back. I recently posted some high school highlights of him in the Nike All-Star game. And you could go back and maybe play like the Nike All-Star game or whatnot using him or something like that. So there's definitely enough material, but I think that you'd have to get a little bit more creative with him than you would somebody like Kobe.
So I just had a look at the 2001 All-Star Game rosters. The only players that are not in 2K at the moment are Rasheed Wallace, who was on the West for the Blazers, and I believe Anthony Mason is no longer in the game. They took him out a few years back. Is Mason back?
I think they put him back in.
So
Pretty sure they put him back in.
He might be back in then. So, but Sheed is definitely out of the game. But there were a couple of injury replacements that year, so you could just put Shaq on the deep bench actually for the 2001 All-Star Game and just have him there inactive or something. So you could definitely make up the 12-man rosters and not have any, not actually have any placeholders if you did the 2001 All-Star Game. So there's definitely some ways around that. And like you say, the Bucks series again. Another significant milestone for him, getting to the finals and beating that Bucks team, and you've got Ray Allen and whatnot to go up against. So yeah, I think you definitely could. You could have the 97 rookie challenge, because of course you've got a young Kobe in that as well. So no, I think you could. Sometimes it's about getting the memorable opponents in the game as well. If you look at NBA's greatest, what they did with that, getting a team like the 93 Hornets in there. Normally, there'd be no reason to really include a team like that, as much as I enjoy having that team in the game. But as far as historical significance, they wouldn't be first on your list. But you get them in there as an opponent of the 93 Bulls, and suddenly you get this cool team to play with that's anchored by a more significant team. So that's how you get those unorthodox retro teams in the game.
No, that makes perfect sense. I do have a question for you, though. A young player in today's NBA, which standout player would you want a come-up mode centered around? Like, which young player are you the most interested in?
I suppose by default someone like a Luka Doncic, but that would be very difficult because you'd have to license some EuroLeague teams, and that's a very expensive license.
No, 100%. I think that people had been following him for years before he did come to the NBA, but you're right, the licensing would be the biggest problem as far as trying to get some of his greatest games and performances and matchups from before he made the NBA. Licensing would be a nightmare.
Yeah, I'm struggling to really think of one that would be interesting and viable. But I will say that this is also a good reason to bring back creating a legend mode, where you're able to play through my career, an NBA my career, using an NBA player. And that's something that's fallen by the wayside, again, because it doesn't make any money, obviously. But that was a great mode that people enjoyed back in the day. It was a way to get an NBA player to play my career with an NBA player without having to do any modding, which was very convenient. So I think creating a legend mode back as well, if nothing else, would be a great idea.
Remember all of those all the mods that came out for like NBA 2K14 for PC, where people made it so you could use like the actual face of one of the NBA players that you wanted in my career.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that was like a big deal. There were a lot of mods for that, and I think that's pretty cool.
So Philly I'm 2K originally mentioned LeBron, which would definitely be popular. I imagine a hook for 2K there. Of course, as you noted, LeBron had Path to Greatness in 2K14. So Philly also suggested the idea of recreating the career of someone like Derrick Rose or Brandon Roy. And that's a what-if scenario. And again, there's a lot of potential there for a lot of fun, and to be able to create alternate history, as you did, or I suppose it was an alternate future with Path to Greatness, but an alternate history for a player like a Derrick Rose or a Brandon Roy or a Grant Hill, and play what might have been. With that, if you're going to go with that fantasy mode as well, what if Tim Duncan joined Tracy McGrady and Grant Hill in Orlando? You could go really crazy with that stuff.
Right. I think the challenge with that, I think it's a great suggestion, as I noted it on Twitter. I think the challenge with that is the emotions tied to it from the players. I think that if you approached Grant Hill or Brandon Roy or Derrick Rose and said, yeah, I know your career didn't pan out the way you wanted. I know that you got hurt or had to retire because of your injuries or your production went way down, etc. I know that you're disappointed in that. And you probably think about the what ifs all the time, but we'd like to create a mode, a fantasy mode around your, or your shortcomings and your injury plagued career. We want to make it like it didn't happen.
Imagine if you had a great career. That's
right. Imagine exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Imagine the career you would have had, and now let kids, play and use you through all of these different scenarios, and make a fantasy, basically make a fantasy career out of the career that you didn't have. So like, I think that is the biggest challenge. And I got to be honest with you, I don't think Derrick Rose, Brandon Roy, or Grant Hill, or anybody else who had their injuries, had their careers mostly ruined or heavily altered, by injuries, I don't think they would say yes to that. So I think that it's a great idea, and I think that people would absolutely love it. They'd love using Tracy McGrady in those scenarios, and all the players we mentioned. But I don't think that they would ever get buy-in from players. I think those wounds are forever, and I think there's too many emotions tied to it.
Another suggestion that Philly had was, I always loved the idea of playing a career of any former NBA player or my NBA from any year. For example, 84 with MJ, which would be the coolest thing ever, but very unlikely for now. 2K doesn't have the rights to every former NBA player, and for other reasons. And that is, again, we'd love to be able to go back and wind back the clock and play from an earlier season, and whether it's a challenge mode or full-on My League or My NBA, of course. But as Philly said, the licensing does get in the way there. But kind of combining that idea with creating a legend, because as you recall, Derek, the original creating a legend, MJ creating a legend in 2K11, which you unlocked at the end of the Jordan Challenge, is that you would get a rookie MJ that you could then put into the current NBA and play, starting with that rookie MJ and building him up over the years, like playing through, as was my player then, not my career, but the career mode, playing with that rookie MJ, placing him on any team you wished. So, I mean, maybe you could do that. You could have historical players and be able to take them and put them into the current NBA and play a my career there. And you wouldn't be able to play historically, but it would be, again, that what-if scenario of what if Allen Iverson came into the league today? What if a young Derrick Rose came in? You might be able to do it that way.
No, I think that's a great idea. So, like, for example, you could put, like, the 10-11 Rose in the current NBA, right?
Sure.
And then that's how you could do his come up. Like, you could say, all right, well, we got the MVP Rose. He's now in the current NBA. This is how he would do as primed, amazing Derrick Rose, healthy Derrick Rose. And now you can go and perform with him. So, yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, as opposed to doing like a what-if mode and like completely hurting the player's feelings.
Yeah, probably more viable in every sense of the every sense. But also mentioned Bill Russell challenged to win at least 12 rings in 13 years, which of course he came close to doing when the St. Louis Hawks did prevent him from doing that, very close to winning 12 and 13, and or possibly Steph Curry, of course, being that a more current player that you would showcase.
Well, I mean, the Bill Russell thing is obviously interesting. The biggest challenge with a Bill Russell mode is the licensing. Yeah, because we're talking about over 60 years ago for trying to get those licenses. So at that point, if you want any accuracy to it as far as players and whatnot, you would need to contact those players' families, or the players are now old men and probably, some of them probably could give two craps about video games, right?
Yeah,
I think there's challenges behind licensing a mode like that. If they did it, they would have to probably use a lot of generic players or generic names around the players that they do have licenses for. They could make it very alive, though, by using retro filters, using a black and white filter, doing era specific rules, removing the 3-point line in the game, all of that stuff. So there is definitely a way that they could make it work, but it's not going to be as accurate as a mode that would be tailored around like a Steph Curry, obviously, or even somebody not as recent, but like Kobe, etc. I think the Curry mode, now that he has 4 rings, a couple MVPs, etc. How good he was even when Mark Jackson was coaching before the 14-15 season. So how good he was in 13-14, etc. There are plenty of moments for Steph Curry now where you could put a mode around him.
And of course, you look at some of the recent retro teams, and there's actually quite a few players missing. In some cases, the older teams are actually more intact than the newer ones. So licensing is always an issue. And as much as I like the idea of really celebrating history in such a detailed way with Russell, and I believe more people should respect NBA history, that's I saw a comment the other day that said only basketball is the only sport where they say that the current players couldn't hang with the the old players, and I think, well, it goes both ways on that one. It's one of the few sports that really disrespects its history in the modern era. But in any case, whole other topic for another time. But to that point, as much as I like the idea of celebrating Bill Russell's career, you put, say, the '69 Celtics in the game, and maybe people will have heard of Bill Russell. They've probably heard of John Havlicek, etc. But are they going to care about Bud Olson or Mal Graham, or even a more prominent figure like Don Chaney, who's probably perhaps known as a coach, if not a player, to young?
Well, I don't know.
People. So,
I'm going to interrupt you. I mean, do they really care about Keith Bogans?
I suppose.
So, I mean, I think it goes both ways. Like, do they really care about Omer Ashik? Like, I think that they're not going to care as much about the bench guys or role players a lot of times, even with some of the current teams. And I think that I agree with like your premise, though, that
they've at least heard of them, though. I'd say if you're a younger fan, you've probably at least heard of some of those players. Especially for a Curry challenge, for example, you will have heard from players of 2015, not so much 1965.
No, 100%. Which is why, in a way, you might be able to, and I think it's disrespect. It would be kind of disrespectful in a way, but why, in a way, you could get away with doing like generated names or generated players, not like with like fake created player cyber faces, but like, maybe they try to work a little bit harder on the player creations for, filling out the benches and whatnot. But, that's why I think they could probably get away with it. If they were doing like a Bill Russell mode, to have like, if they didn't have all the licenses, they could get away with like generic names and, worked on faces, but not faces from that actual team.
No, that's true as well. But I still like the idea in theory, but it might be a harder sell because people remember some of the bigger names that are recalled as the all-time greats, but will they care to play with those older teams, with those older players, with those plumbers and dentists? That is the uphill battle, unfortunately, with a mode like that.
Well, you and I, we care about accuracy and history and all of that stuff. We do care about like the Keith Bogans and the Omer Ashiks, right?
Sure, yeah.
And we do care about on the class. We do care about on the class teams like the Mel Counts and all of that stuff, like Gary Ward and whatnot. If they could have him on the team and everything, like. We care about that stuff, but what I was talking about is the average 2K player isn't going to piss and moan or have like a hissy fit or want to write into 2K because a certain team is missing, one of Bill Russell's teams is missing like a role player, or maybe the 10-11 Bulls are missing like a guy like Keith Bogans. That's why you don't see, because Keith Bogans actually, I don't know if he's back in the game, but he had been missing from the game for a couple of years. There was no uproar on social media. You actually didn't even really hear about it at all.
True.
For like the fact that he was missing from the 10-11 Bulls.
No, that's a great point. I think someone did bring it up, and he said, "Oh, I'm willing to be there. They haven't reached out to me, so."
One random person was like, "Hey, Keith Bogans, do you want to be in two?" I think it was Pete Toll. It might have been him.
Yeah,
he's like,
probably.
I think he said, Keith Bogans, do you want to be in 2K? You're missing from the 10-11 Bulls. He's like, yeah, why don't they contact me? Like, I want to be in the game. And then he still wasn't in the game. So you wonder how much it has to do with either time and resources. They're not using time and resources to reach out to the players, or if it has to do with priorities and laziness.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure.
From JMO, of course, shout out to JMO for those fantastic mods. I've always liked Kawhi's career path, the chance to win in 3 different orgs, and it progressively gets more challenging going from a team of superstars to him becoming the guy. He's also amazing on both ends. And Kawhi being more of that quiet player might also be a difficult sell, but that would be very unique. That's a very unique suggestion. And again, if you're looking at celebrating different players' careers, he is definitely a current player that you would have to have that maybe the rise of or greatest games of. Whether you would dedicate the entire historical mode to Kawhi Leonard, I'm not sure if they would definitely go that far, but I think he's definitely a player you would have to feature. If you did a modern NBA's greatest, or the greatest stars of now, you definitely have to have Kawhi Leonard.
No, I mean, 100%. I thought that was a very unique name to bring up. I thought it was a good suggestion. He definitely has moments in his career, from the 13-14 Spurs title run to, entering Toronto, playing there 1 year, having that high arcing shot, the high bounce off the rim that unbelievably went in to, seal the 76ers' fate. etc., than winning that championship with Toronto. He definitely has enough moments you could conjure up in his career, and he's not done yet, like I said in the comments. He definitely has enough moments in his career where you could build a mode around him. And like he said, he's a fun player to use in video games. He's a two-way player. He's fun to use on defense. He's fun to use on offense because he can score the ball. He has range, all of that stuff. He can post up. Probably some of the biggest and best hands in the entire NBA throughout his entire career, etc.
The claw, he is the claw.
Yeah, the claw, exactly. Right. So, no, I think that was a good suggestion.
And once again, it also allows you to get those extra teams into the game.
Right. I want to acknowledge the elephant in the room, though. There would probably be a lot of pissed off people out there if Kawhi Leonard somehow got his own mode before Kobe.
This is true, yes.
You got to think about stuff like that. There would be enough complaining if Curry got his own mode at this point. And even though LeBron had 2K14 Path to Greatness, people would be like, well, why is Curry getting his own mode? And why is LeBron not getting his at this point? So, Kawhi Leonard would be a very hard sell to this NBA fan population. I think you'd get quite a few complaints about why is there a mode built around him.
J-23, a little off topic, but still in the realm, 24/7 mode. I don't know why, but that to me was a great mode to play. As far as play mode similar to Jordan, it's obviously Kobe's time for one, long overdue. Games like Kobe Airball Game, Lakers down 13 to Portland in 2000, Kobe's 81, Kobe at Madison Square Garden, Kobe's 40 points per game month, Kobe's 3-point records, Kobe's Game 7 versus Celtics, Kobe versus Suns, Kobe versus AI, and so much more. And with such a lengthy career, once again, the amount of teams that you could add and players that you could represent and get some of those players that are exclusive to my team currently, find a way to put them into those default rosters, which would also be great for roster mods, just putting it out there. Yeah, Kobe is such a no-brainer for so many reasons.
So much content for Kobe, right?
Yeah.
Just there's so many moments. I like the idea that he actually threw in the 2 airball game because that's a situation you could fix, right? So you're playing in that game, and instead of putting up 2 airballs, maybe you get Kobe that win.
Absolutely.
And the Lakers that win. And then, he mentioned the Suns. Maybe you go to 2006, when they were up 3-1 on the Suns in the first round, and you're playing Game 5, and you have to win that series against the Suns. So instead of them blowing that lead and then the Suns winning the series in 7, you move Kobe on with Kwame Brown, if they can get the license for him, Smush Parker, if they can get the license for him. See, we still have licensing issues here in that 2006 Lakers team, and you move them on to the second round, and maybe you try to push them through for a championship run. So I love the idea of also fixing past follies that players had in their career and being able to maybe move them forward when they actually didn't move forward in real life.
Definitely alternate history, rewriting history for sure. You could have those fantasy scenarios. The finals we never got, Kobe versus LeBron.
Right, exactly. So you get to try to push that matchup. Personally, I think that the Lakers would win that and Kobe would win that. I think you believe so as well.
Yes.
But that's a matchup that a lot of people did want to see and they still talk about today. So maybe you could make that happen in a Kobe challenge mode.
And just to quickly touch on it, I haven't actually spent a lot of time with 24/7 mode. I wasn't playing 2K at that time. I do want to go back and spend some time with it because I'd love to do a Way Back Wednesday on that mode because a lot of people do have nostalgia for it. I'm not sure of your memories of that mode, but I do see that come up a lot, that people really enjoyed that from the earlier 2Ks.
I remember playing it a little bit, but I don't remember enough about it. So I'm with you. I have to revisit it, play it, etc. because I have the games.
We have the games, people.
Yeah, we have the games, trust me. But I'd have to dive into it again because it's been a really long time, and I'd have to look at the makeup of the mode and how it went.
And Just E the Gamer, suggests an NBA 75th anniversary team. 1 game for each player, their most iconic game, you have to replicate with similar usage, efficiency, and hot zones. Would help players learn different player archetypes and playstyles, different playbooks, and teach the history of the game. Could even do 2 for each. Maybe first game is their rookie opener, less attributes badges, and the other is their most iconic game. They need to feel their growth and development, but also understand how to use them as a shell of themselves to translate into other modes. And again, this is a very creative idea. I'd love to see it. I mentioned a 75th anniversary celebration from a team perspective and kind of selected great games through history. I think the only problem with the 75th team, that is 75 different players, getting that many retro teams in a complete state and implementing that would be very challenging. But if they could do it, that would be awesome.
Right, 100%. I mean, there'd be challenges like Bill Sharman, right? Like he's one of the top 75 players.
And there's also overlap. There's also overlap there with Russell, for example. I mean,
right.
Yes. I mean, I suppose you wouldn't need to have 75 different teams or 150 different teams, I suppose, for an opponent and you'd be able to double up and recycle.
Right.
Teams.
You'd be able to overlap. No, you'd definitely be able to overlap. I think that a lot of the challenges would be utilizing assets and teams that they already have in the game as well. So they wouldn't even have to add new teams. But like you said, 75 is a lot. So you're looking at a challenge mode that has 75 different games in it. That's a lot of new content to add. That's a lot of additional programming and whatnot. So I definitely think that would be a challenge to implement.
And as far as the iconic game, I'm sure you could get one for all 75 players, but they're not all created equal as far as being defining moments in NBA history. Like a Dave Bing, for example, I can't think of one off the top of my head, and this may be disrespectful, you may be able to correct me on this, but I can't think of a Dave Bing game that I would say, that is one of the top 75 moments in NBA history.
Right. I think the thing, though, is that it's more about putting that player on the floor, and it's almost like a learning opportunity. You get to use them in their atmosphere with their rules in their decade and whatnot. And maybe they have facts around the player before you enter the mode or after, to go along with the mode, etc. So you can learn about them and everything. I agree with him that it is definitely a missed opportunity for them to do nothing really for offline content for the 75th anniversary. No challenge mode or anything like that. And you could definitely do something with it. And I don't think that his idea of having, 75 different games representing the top 75 players, I don't think it's a bad idea at all. I just think that it would be really hard license-wise. I think it would still require a lot of new content to be added to the game, and there would have to be a lot of programming around it that's not already in the game.
No, that's true. But and you bring up a great point there, and obviously you can double up and recycle those teams as well. But celebrating the 75th anniversary in some way beyond a My Team card or whatever, or a special cover, as cool as that cover art was, don't get me wrong, it's something should have been done, and it would have been nice to have that, but unfortunately it all went into redesigning the city. I mean, that's maybe a glib and cynical way of putting it, but, well, we know where the focus is, do we not?
Well, if you're going to create the city, why not put, like, Kobe and Julius Erving in it, right? They
wearing Crocs, or they're going to be wearing...
No, not wearing Crocs. Oh my God, Kobe would slap you for saying that. No, but yeah, Julius Erving and Kobe and whatnot, and Kobe had experience actually at Rucker Park. There's video of him playing at Rucker Park, and he was absolutely excellent. And then obviously Julius Erving, one of the most legendary Rucker Park players of all time. In fact, that's where he ended up getting the nickname the Doctor. Actually, was at Rucker Park. So when I think of city basketball, or I think of playing basketball outside in that atmosphere, I always go back to thinking about like Julius Erving playing at Rucker Park, and Kobe playing street baller at Rucker Park and whatnot.
Put Rucker Park in the city. That would be something that I'd prefer that to Crocs. Absolutely.
There you go.
I'm Cheesy on Twitter. A KD mode would be dope, especially if it gave you a choice to stay in OKC, something similar to the LeBron mode in 2K14. Yeah, Kevin Durant, obviously another well-established current star with a lot of great moments throughout his lengthy career at this point. You certainly could do that, much like a Curry mode or a LeBron mode, yeah. And to include a what-if, staying in OKC or going to Golden State just spices up even more.
He has plenty of moments where you could create a mode around him. You could even start off the mode with you using him with the Seattle Sonics. They can get enough licenses for that team, because a lot of people, I think, forget that he didn't start out his career with OKC. He was with Seattle.
That's right, yeah.
So, I mean, it'd be cool to see him in those threads and be able to use him in a game from his Seattle days as well, because there's a lot of nostalgia around the Seattle Supersonics and whatnot. But yeah, you could do like a whole, what if scenario, place him in the 2012 finals, and maybe one of your challenges is to, take him and Westbrook and Harden and whatnot. That team's already in the game anyway, the 11-12 Thunder. And maybe you try to conquer the Heat and you win him that championship. So he doesn't just have the 2 championships with Golden State. And then maybe you have a choice instead of, signing with the Warriors. Maybe they give you the choice where you can sign with Boston. Right, because that was rumored he was meeting with Boston, and
that's right. Yeah,
him walking with meeting with the Celtics and Tom Brady and whatnot, and Tom Brady trying to recruit him to Boston and everything. So maybe instead of him being with Golden State, maybe you place him in Boston. So and then you try to make a run with him there. So that alternate route and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, a KD mode would be really interesting. Is there anybody more active as an NBA player on social media than Kevin Durant? Probably not.
On his burner and on main.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. He has a burner. Still, and he uses it all the time. Oh, 100%. So yeah, no, that's a good idea.
And finally, Sports Game Experiments at TotalGuy6385 on Twitter. I would say the Golden State Warriors, since they just won the NBA Finals. And yeah, either a mode that celebrates all of the championships or some of the best championships of clubs that have won several, or even just a Champions Challenge that highlights some of the most legendary NBA Finals series over the years, again tying in with that 75th anniversary of the league. I think that'd be fantastic.
Right, maybe in 2016, Draymond Green doesn't get suspended in this mode, right? And then you have a chance to face off with the Cavs with a healthy roster. And maybe you bring them their second straight championship in a row at that point. And maybe, you win again in 16-17 and 17-18 and you reel off 4 in a row. And then maybe Kevin Durant doesn't leave in your scenario. So maybe he continues on with the Warriors and you have the option of making it work with him there. And then, who knows what happens after that. So no, I think that's a really great idea. A lot of what ifs around the Golden State Warriors, but even without the what ifs, they accomplished so much over the last decade that there's more than enough ideas for that would make up a challenge mode for that team.
And if you're doing the Champions Challenge, you could have also a remix version of this to take an idea from NBA Jam, the EA Sports NBA Jam. You could have, for example, I mentioned the finals we never got, the Kobe versus LeBron. That is just one finals that we never got. I mean, what if you had a cobbled together 94 Bulls with that's got Tony Kukoc there as a rookie, but MJ is still on the team, doesn't retire, going against the 94 Rockets? All kinds of what if there. Does MJ go for the 4th straight title? Does he achieve that? Things, you can do a lot of what if scenarios and really mix and match and remix those challenges, as well as having replaying those challenges from the greatest moments in NBA history. So there's so much they could do, and not to harp on the point, but find a way to make it so that it's not going to hurt their bottom line. That the suits aren't going to look at it and say, "Oh, well, does that bring us money?" It doesn't. Forget about it. Do it for the art. Do it for the love of the history of the sport.
Yeah, one of the biggest what ifs that people don't really talk about a lot now is what if Jordan didn't go and play baseball, and what if he did stay and do the Bulls reel off 8 championships in a row? Does Chicago struggle with Hakeem Olajuwon and Houston's size like they struggled with other teams that had size like the Spurs and whatnot in the past? Do they still lose in the 1994 finals? And does Jordan make the NBA Finals, Jordan and the Bulls, in the 94-95 season if he had a full season under his belt and not only 17 regular season games? And if they do make the finals, do they take down Hakeem Olajuwon and newly acquired Clyde Drexler and be able to take down that Houston team that had so much chemistry and so much going for them? It's one of the biggest what ifs in NBA history because people talk about Jordan being the GOAT now. I think he's the greatest basketball player of all time, the greatest basketball player I've ever seen. But if he reeled off 8 championships, a lot of the conversation in a row, a lot of the conversation you see now in this ridiculous GOAT debate and whatnot, that would just be gone. Like I would think a lot of it would go away.
Plus the additional statistics of playing a few extra full seasons at full strength and really padding those all-time numbers. I think that'd be... I mean, I'm with you. I think it is a ridiculous debate, and whittling it down to just 2 players as well, and not mentioning so many other great players. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson get very underrated in these discussions, just to put it out there. But I think there'd be even less debate, or you couldn't even make that case if...
right, the media has made it like Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, like they don't matter and that they don't exist, and that they, it's like their accomplishments and what they did mean nothing. So they've just narrowed it down to only 2 players. And you and I have talked about this before. It's completely disrespectful and it's ridiculous, and it's obviously on purpose because they want people to just focus on those 2 players, a current player and a past player. But yeah, it's ridiculous.
And all the more reason to have these historical modes in video games, because this is how a lot of people, including us back in the day, learned about the current league. But certainly you have that facility now to learn about the history of the league with all the legendary players that weren't really in the games when we grew up. Obviously there were a few. The NBA action games had some retro teams long before Live and 2K did. But now you've got all this retro content that you can have, and this historical content, and to celebrate the history of the league. So I'd love to see 2K do more with that moving forward, rather than just having souped up historical players as my team cards.
No, 100%. I agree.
But thank you to everybody who responded to that question. As we said, so many great responses. Such an interesting topic that we had to turn it from a mailbag into a full-blown discussion, Derek.
No, 100%. Thank you to the community for not only participating and answering the mailbag question, but also getting incredibly creative and throwing out all of these different ideas and scenarios. Because like I said, it would have been really easy for you to just say Kobe. Build a mode around Kobe, which obviously you could do, and that's obviously a great idea. But, we got people saying, build a mode around Kawhi Leonard, and here's why. Build a mode around Steph Curry or the Warriors. What about what-if scenarios like Grant Hill, et cetera. So I think what I love about the community, that responds to our mailbag and listens to the show and all of that stuff, is they're super creative, and thank you for that.
And just to put it out there, there are times when the modding community can step in where we don't have that content by default. Obviously, creating a full-blown challenge mode is beyond the scope of modding, but we could always make some custom rosters where some of these historical matchups and what-if scenarios are played out. So keep that in mind. Keep that creativity going for the modding community, and of course keep those mods free and freely available to everyone. But yes, that has brought us to the end of episode 432 of the NLSC Podcast. Thank you as always for joining us to talk about basketball and basketball video games. The NLSC Podcast comes out every week here on the NLSC, which is me-live.com, of course. You can also tune in on our YouTube channel, as well as all the podcatching apps and platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, etc. And on those platforms, if you'd like to leave us a review, we'd certainly appreciate it. And Derek, we do want to connect with our listeners, so once again, what are your handles?
You can reach me on Twitter at D4384 or at D43G, and it's DEE 4, the number 4, 3, THREE. You can also reach me on YouTube, D43, and the NLSC, where I'm also D43.
I am Andrew in our forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. As noted earlier, the NLSC is on Facebook and Twitter at the NLSC. We have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball. Our aforementioned YouTube channel is youtube.com/NBA Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. But yes, that's all for this week, so thank you once again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.